All systems go. Clear for liftoff.
What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy GS Luke here with our round 4 showdown stream for the Genesis Scottish Open. Gonna get you guys ready to build all your lineups, but first off, a look at the weather report, some strategy heading into Sunday, ownership, also some shots gained metrics to help you guys build your player pool, as well as on top of that, a few looks at your questions and deep dives in the chat. So anything that you're curious about, feel free to go ahead and let me know. Those can be specific players that you want to look through the stats on, and that could be anything process based as well. So whether that's lineup construction, trying to find the right contest for your desires on Sunday, anything is fair game. And it looks like we got Go Collect down there already, one of the sweaty tryhards, a regular on the show, also Showdown as well, with a question that we'll get to later on. Any of those questions will be touched on in maybe like 5 to 10 minutes, but we got some stuff to touch on before that. But great to see you guys in the live chat, and let's get this thing rolling. So first and foremost, golf course today played pretty flat across the board. I actually thought the morning wave would be easier than the afternoon, but the weather forecast wasn't as accurate as days 1 and 2. It ended up being a lot calmer in the afternoon than we saw on those weather models. So it played actually easier in the afternoon wave, which probably means it played even because those were the players that were in form, your top tier guys to begin with. So you'd expect them to play to a slightly lower average, and about 0.25 shots is typically what we see for those leaders in terms of that talent level. So, didn't really play a massive factor today, and kind of unfortunate that it wasn't favoring those morning starters because on those forecasts last night, it looked like that was going to be the case. So again, not every set, I guess, is going to work out for us with the exact weather that we're hoping for, but when it does, it can be a pretty big edge. But for tomorrow, it is not going to be a factor because with the fog that they're expecting in the morning, you may have seen the tweet from the DP World Tour, also the PGA Tour, saying that they're not starting until about 11 local time. And that is because of the fact that it's going to be completely almost like blackout conditions. You're talking about dense sea fog up until maybe even 10 a.m. So they're going to be warming up in some of that deep stuff as well. So they're going off in threesomes off of both sides. So even if there was going to be maybe a split between the morning and afternoon, because they're going off of 1 in 10 and in only like a 2.5 hour window, you're not going to have any wiggle room for that. So the forecast for Sunday, though, looks maybe a little bit less windy than what it did for today. And yeah, it was pretty calm in the afternoon, but you still had a 10, maybe 15 mile an hour breeze. Tomorrow, it's closer to 10 to 12 miles an hour. So even calmer than what we had in the afternoon. But this golf course, as it continues to bake out and get firmer and faster throughout the week, still played over par today. So even though the weather wasn't as big a factor as what it could have been, it still played the hardest of all 3 days. So it played about an even par, 0.15 under par round number 2. So for round 4, with the kind of pin locations that we see on Sunday, that's probably going to be the case once again. So don't sleep on this golf course. It is, in my opinion, a very fair test and one that I'm thoroughly looking forward to. Before we go through the shots gained metrics, also want to mention the ownership angle. So we'll go ahead and bring that up. And these aren't finalized yet. These are like my rough draft projections that I was working on for my Patreon page, but they're going to give us a good idea of where the ownership is coming in because for Sunday Showdown, it is extremely predictable. And that, of course, is in your top 5, top 10. The reason for that is, and the reason why it's even more so the case than like round 2 and 3 Showdown is because you have placement points in play for Sunday. You get, 12, 13 points for finishing at first. You get about a birdie's worth for finishing in like second, third. So it makes a pretty big difference because the guys that are finishing in the top 3 are probably going to be making 6, 7 birdies anyways, you'd think, if they're going to win this golf tournament. It's a compressed enough leaderboard where somebody's going to have a good round tomorrow. Those guys really matter for Sunday Showdown. So you're going to see a lot of people focusing on the top 5, top 10. Not to say that they're all fades because of this ownership, but it has to be kept in mind when you're going through your build. So top owns play, I've got it Rory McIlroy. You'd expect that as the co-leader. Also, as one of the more expensive options, he's going to get some steam, but also Chris Goddard up at -11. So I've got them both right around 40%. I would say that in some of your higher dollar single entries, even just your single entries in general, that these two are going to be even chalkier than you see right there. And this does say GPP ownership, so I do cater my projections towards that. But in those contests, single entries and whatnot, both of these players could be over 50% owned. So if you're going to use them, just know that you're going to have to get really different with the rest of your lineup, particularly if you'd use both of those players together. Then you have a little bit of a step down to these next guys at like -9, -10. So Matt Fitzpatrick, I have it a little bit over 35%. So because you can use him as a second man in with Rory, and I think a lot of people are going to use these top three players together. In fact, a lineup going $11K, $8,900, and then $8,000, those could be the three spend ups that you use. It would be a little aggressive, a little bit expensive for your first three players, but you can make it work. These three guys are going to be who a majority of your casuals focus on. And I don't think you have to make a roll or anything to only play like at most one of those three players. But at least personally, I want, especially if I'm in a large field GPP, like the big $5 or $25, I want at most of one of these top three players. And, you know, if you're playing a Chris Goddard up that's taking you off of a Rory and a Matt Fitzpatrick, and that's going to be a tough scene, I would say that if you're in a GPP with less than 1,000 entries, then, you know, I wouldn't worry about that sort of thing. But what I worry about if you're playing multiple of those players together is then what are you doing in this range? Right? Are you fading all of these guys then? Or are you going to let one or maybe even two of these players sneak in as well? And if you're doing that, that could be 4 or 5 pieces of chalk right there. And, you know, when you're in that $5 or $25 GPP, you're going to need some placement points to take it down, but it's not the end all be all. When you play Showdown on Sunday, you're still going to get guys that are shooting -5, -6, especially because conditions don't look as bad as today. I think it could be closer to like an even par scoring average. I still think it'll be tough pins, but maybe slightly easier scoring overall than what we had on Saturday. If that's the case, and we have -5, -6 rounds out there, if they're coming from guys that are in last place to start the day, you're still going to have that guy to have the absolutely nutted lineup. And that's why I don't think you want to only be taking guys towards the top here, is that there's still enough scoring out there that you're going to need some chasers. And then from the ownership angle and trying to get leverage versus the rest of the field, you've got to consider that angle as well, especially in that like $5 or $25 GPP. So that's why I'm a little hesitant to want to play multiple of those top tier players. Now, would I go like one of those top three and then maybe one of these step down guys as my second man in? And I guess maybe even Matt Fitzpatrick shouldn't be included with those top two. Maybe it's just like one of those top two and then jumping down into this next range. I don't hate doing that for a lot of my lineup construction. And you can see on that next tier down, you have Matty Fitz that was leading it off, but also Clark at about 25%, Jake Knapp, Penge at also about 25% ownership. And then even your -7s like an Aubert, Straka, and English are also going to be getting quite a bit of steam. So it's like I said, predictable because it's a Sunday showdown slate. These are probably going to move a bit by the time that I post them on my Patreon page. I plan on having those up about 20, maybe 25 minutes after this live stream ends. I've got to get my player poll on there, all of that sort of stuff. And then that's when I'll be able to upload it. But these guys towards the top, you can use them. I'd say you're going to want at least 2 of these guys in every single lineup. I would say of everyone that you can see here on the screen, at least 2 of these players, but you don't want like 4 or 5 in the same lineup. That's when you would start to really get into trouble. And the lineups where you could maybe start to see yourself playing like 3 or 4 of them together, right? It's not going to be like all the 9K guys, right? You can't fit Rory, of Matt Fitz, a Aubert, and then let's say a Goddard up as your 4th man into a lineup, right? That's not going to work from the salary component. But the lineups that you're going to see a lot of casual players use are either using Rory and then the 7Ks. So like Rory, Goddard up, Knapp, Penge, and then, you know, maybe there's another 7K guy just a little bit below this that is also really high owned so that they can mix in with that. Or it's going to be the super balanced lineup. It's going to be going like Matty Fitz, playing all this 8K chalk. So yeah, probably Goddard up in that lineup. Wyndham Clark, I guess you could throw Aubert, Straka into that sort of build. You're going to see a lot of people that don't understand the game theory component jamming in far too much chalk in one of those 2 cases. So just don't do that, right? Don't go too overboard with it would be my main recommendation. For the entire projections, the everything that I'm doing after it's live, that can be found on the Patreon, like I was saying before. Let me go ahead and share my screen. We're going to go through the shots gained metrics next. I actually shared the wrong tab there, so my apologies. Let's bring up the right one so we can get this thing rocking. And we're going to go through some player pool deep dives here in a second. So if there's anyone that you want me to go through all the stats on, I am more than willing to do so. But before we go through any of those specific players, we are going to go through the field as a whole. So we're going to go through the shots gained metrics from round 3, and then also for the entire event to help you with some of your conviction plays towards the top. What's going on, Prep Joan? You also got Colin down there as well. Best of luck with your round 4 lineup. So let me know if you guys have anything that you guys need. So let's see. So what is this guy saying? You say flat across the board killed you. I think you may have gone a little too overboard with it, man. It's we said it was a slight weather lean, right? So maybe it's a learning point for you, right? When you hear slight weather lean, that doesn't mean only play guys from that side. And heck, I mean, I know I mentioned it at least once last night. There were plenty of guys towards the end of tee times that I was playing, right? Like Xander Schauffele, I already pointed that out. A few other spend up options as well. Just I think some people, when they hear something, right, they go all in on that aspect. It's only worth going all in like we had on round 2. Round 2 showdown, where we knew it was going to be at least a stroke difference. That's where the weather is really something that you want to hone in on. Not so much today. Today, we knew at best it was going to be like a half a stroke, probably close to about a 0.25 shot advantage towards the AM side. It was I don't know, a learning point, I would say, Colin. If that really tailed you off today, then you weren't building lineups the right way. I don't think anyone was saying it was going to be a big edge. But let's talk to this round 3 stuff. So the ball striking stats are normally where I start this process to try and find my plays, and it's because it's the most consistent part of golf. Now, does that mean that the short game is going to keep up with it? No, because look at Daniel Berger today. Berger really graded out well, same way actually that he grades out heading into round 4. Ball striking, great, 3 shots gained into the positive there, but he lost 5 strokes in the short game. Now, is there a good chance that he doesn't lose 5 strokes in the short game for 3 days in a row now at this point? I would say, yeah, there's a pretty decent chance that that happens. But does it also mean that he's going to gain the 2 to 3 strokes that we need for him to have a nutted round? Probably not. In fact, I wouldn't expect him to go from losing like 4 or 5 strokes in the short game in multiple days to having a nutted round in those categories. Now, I do think that he's going to be closer to a neutral, but the shots gained metrics are a lot more interesting when they're players that are better with the form. So, for example, like a Victor Hovland at T20, he's not going to be a mega chalk either because he's not starting in the top 5, top 10. So he's somebody that you could look at after his really good approach day. He gained almost all of his strokes, by the way, with his irons, which is even an added bonus between off the tee and approach. That's what constitutes shots gained ball striking. Approach is by far the most important. And Nikolai Højgaard at T15, he's also somebody to keep an eye on. He gained across both categories, so over 1.5 off the tee and over 2 strokes on approach. At T15, he's going to be getting some steam, especially because he's a 7K range guy. In the 7K range, there's not a whole bunch of players at T15 or better. There's a handful, and all of them are going to be around 10%, if not close to 15% ownership. So if you want to use him as a conviction play, I could get behind that. I haven't built my player pool yet, so I'm not 100% sure whether he's going to be one of those stands that I'm taking. But with this kind of stat profile where the short game was just about a neutral in both categories, it's going to be mighty fine tempting for me to do so. And just to kind of double check on my projections, let me actually sort this by price. So I just want to see the guys that are around a Højgaard and kind of what I'm dealing with in terms of like comparison. So 1 second while I do so. So what is his price tag? So he's $7,400. I've got him about 10% projected owned right now. I'm looking at my projections around him. Like a Jordan L. Smith is maybe a little bit lower owned. Same thing with Nicholas Echeverria. He's also like 5, maybe 6% owned. But Højgaard is not the highest owned player in that range. I have guys like Kevin Yu, slightly higher owned. I also, Matty Schmidt, who's only $100 cheaper. I have higher owned than a Nikolai Højgaard. So though I do think that, compared to some of the other players, right, he's quote unquote higher owned. He's not the chalkiest of all the chalk in that range. So with this kind of stat profile, there's a very, very good chance that he's going to make his way into my kind of player pool. And just to double check on Victor as well, Victor is going to get some steam because he's starting at that number. But because there is a decent amount of chalk around him, same exact story as what we had with Nikolai Højgaard. You have Aubert I have close to 20% ownership on Aubert at this point. I've got Xander Schauffele as well, getting some steam and taking that away from Victor Hovland. He's in the low teens ownership in my early run of ownership projections. So, a Victor Hovland with this kind of stat profile too, if we were looking to kind of get cute up top, not take maybe a Fitzpatrick that's going to be like 40% owned, or spending up for like a Rory McIlroy. If we're choosing to, in that lineup, maybe you're using a Chris Gotterup as your conviction play. You're choosing to take that chalk rather than the chalk towards the top end of the board. Victor Hovland would be a way to still sneak in some differentiation, because what you could run into with a Chris Gotterup lineup is if you use chalk towards the top end of the board and a Chris Gotterup, then it's like where you're getting your differentiation, because normally we're doing that towards the bottom end of the board. And if you're not careful about who you're using as like your other cheap player, your one or two other cheap plays towards the bottom end of the board, then you could really run into a leverage issue. So that's why I kind of like guys like Victor Hovland and having them in my Sunday player pool, is because they give me more optionality if I want to play chalk towards the middle to the bottom. And, if you don't have guys, let's say in the 9-10K range that are average to slightly below average ownership, you're not going to have as much flexibility to play those guys in that 7K range. And again, I haven't built my player pool quite yet, so I'm not 100% sure whether I'm going to need that, but it is something that I like to have in my back pocket. You mentioned the Daniel Berger thing already. Kai is just, he has the short game yips or something. It's like been the whole event at this point where he can't gain anything. And just to go back to that, if you guys weren't with us for the round 2 live stream, he had almost the exact same stat profile, right? He gained on approach, maybe not as significantly as today, but he lost 3 strokes in the short game. And if we go to round number 1, just to double check on that, he did gain short game. So he's shown it to us before. Now, I wouldn't do this in like a single entry or in anything like a cash lineup, but Daniel Berger, I've got him at, I believe, sub 5% ownership. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but at T66, next to no one's going to be using him. If you're in the large field GPP, like the big $5 or $25, and let's say that you're playing a Rory and a Chris Gotterup lineup, which it's harder to pull off, but that's when somebody like Daniel Berger really comes in handy, because if you're going to have a core like that, that's going to be tough to try and build around, mixing in a Daniel Berger gives you, at sub 5% ownership, just infinite leverage at one of your 6 spots. And if you happen to get, let's say, that spike round, round 1, him gaining over a stroke in those 2 categories, he's going to have to do better than that to completely break the slate. But let's say he somehow gains like 2 strokes short game and then continues to hit the ball like he has for the first few days. It could be that sort of performance. I wouldn't count on it. It's a low percentage outcome for a reason, but there's a time and a place, a contest and a type of lineup where I could see myself getting to a Daniel Berger. I would say, though, not going to be, if he's in my player pool, I'd say that it's probably a 50-50 prospect as of right now. He would be only in GPP lineups and would be like a very, very low exposure play. I'm talking about like 10% or probably less in my kind of player pool. And John Perry, shout out to LSU Nick, by the way. He was somebody that was on John Perry the day before. Also, shout out to my guy, a Illini fan. He had a takedown today after listening to the live stream. Gave me a shout out as well, so I appreciate the kind words there, man. And nice takedown, nice lineup that you had. It was a beauty. It was a lot of the players that I was on, but unfortunately not on them in the same lineup together. And I forgot who the exact player was, but you had one real good diamond in the rough in there that I didn't see coming. So shout out to you. And then, LSU Nick, not even just with the call on John Perry, but Hugo Cousseau, who is the Frenchman from the DP World Tour. He also had a really low round. And one of the other guys, he pointed out like 4 or 5 guys. He was asking about the shots gained metrics. I think like 3 or 4 of them had some of the better rounds of the day. So hopefully Nick was able to take advantage of that. I haven't been able to message him quite yet. But let's keep this thing going with the shots gained metrics. Perry, by the way, reason we had that tangent, he lost almost 2 strokes putting and was one of the better ball striking players in the field. So, if you want to get to that as a low-owned play, I could see it. He's T35, so you're not going to get placement points there. He's probably starting too far back. If he goes batshit nuclear, maybe he gets close to like a top 15, a top 10, but that would probably be the very best, I would say. But if you're going to need a GPP flyer to offset some chalk, these are the sort of plays that make sense. And, not so much the case with a Rory or a Tom Kim. They had great ball striking days, not something that we can overlook, especially with Rory. First 2 days, he lost strokes with the approach play. Round 3 completely flipped that around. So, first few days, I was a non-believer in Rory. After today, I'm more 50-50 now. I still remember days 1 and 2, right? You can't completely overlook that just a couple days later. But he did have a much better day with the irons in round number 3. So at least something that you want to throw into your process, incorporate, know in the back of your mind that Rory is at least trending the right direction. although he will be the highest owned player on the slate. Tom Kim at T7, he's -7 heading into the last round. He's got elite tier course history. I used him today, was able to take advantage, at least in some of my lineups. Just didn't have enough good plays around him to get a takedown myself. But at the $7,600 mark, he's hitting the ball well as well. So like if you're looking to get to these conviction plays, especially with like a Rory, a Tom Kim, you're looking at 15 to some cases 40% plus ownership like we have on Rory, you're going to have to absolutely love the play. So on top of just looking at the round 3 stats, like we can look at that for some of our, medium to low owned plays. I think that can be enough to get you onto one of those ones. But when you're really committing to, let's say, a Rory McIlroy, that's when I want to look at the entire event together. So let's actually isolate Rory McIlroy real quickly before we continue down the ball striking list there for the entire week. And this is why I'm kind of 50-50 on whether I think he's a good player or not. Looking for the entire week stats, he is 3 strokes into the positive on approach. All of that was from today. In fact, he was negative before we got to round number 3. But he's gained 3 strokes around the green and over 6 strokes with a putter. That just reeks unsustainability. Doesn't feel like something that he's going to be able to continue for the entire event. And those are the sort of players that I don't want to say it's like impossible for me to want to play, but at 40% ownership, I would say that there's an argument for fading Rory McIlroy tomorrow. I did it today. It was not my brightest move. I got away with it in most cases just because he was expensive. There were other guys up top that you could have played, especially at like the 8-9K range that paid off as well. But for round 4 showdown, it might be another fade for me on Rory McIlroy. So let's go back to the round 3 stats and bring up the ball striking. So you got Connor Syme as the next player down. He's T66. So just like a Daniel Berger, if you're looking for somebody, I would say only $5, $25 GPP where it would make sense to get to this sort of play. But if you've got to offset a Goddard McIlroy lineup, maybe you go that direction too. And just like Daniel Berger, as you'd expect with him not having his fastball today, the reason why he shot over par was because the short game was horrendous. In fact, he almost lost 4 strokes to the field there. And I know we're going through the ball striking stats here first, but I know we're also pointing out some of these short game regression candidates as well. Just while the ball striking is the most consistent part of the game, what we look to kind of continue from round to round, these short game statistics tend to be a lot more variant. And I know we already mentioned that with the Daniel Berger stuff before, but same thing with the Connor Syme. And maybe Syme's a better candidate for it, just because Berger's been kind of shitty with the short game for a few months. It's not even just this event. It's been a trend for quite some time. Round 2, Syme did also lose with a putter, and round 1, he did as well. So yeah, I guess he's kind of got the Daniel Berger syndrome going too, where it's been into the negative for all 3 days. But if we can find somebody with a little bit more of a semblance of hope in that category, those could be a bounce back candidate for round 4. So let's look at Harris English 2 next. So he's the next player down on the ball striking list. He did gain a bunch around the green, which is a bit of a red flag, but was about neutral with the putter. So it's not like he was making too many putts or way above his baseline in that category. Next up, we got Jake Knapp at about 2 strokes gained to ball striking. Did it across both categories too in a very consistent manner. And then short game wise was about a neutral to the field. So Harris English, a Jake Knapp, maybe those two are worth a deep dive as well over these few different rounds. So let's do Knapp first, and then we'll go back to Harris English. So for the entire week, Jake Knapp has gained like 10 strokes putting. So though today's shots gained metrics were exactly what we wanted, ball striking and then losing with the short game, before that, he was completely short game dependent. So this is another one where we have 2 kind of diverging trends. One that tells us that, yeah, he's looking like he's trending in the right direction. And then the full event stuff that tells us, ooh, this is looking sketchy, because look at the approach stats through the first 3 days. He's actually lost strokes to the field there. And let's go to Harris English. I believe he has a little bit of a better stat profile. Yeah, he's gained about 6 strokes approach through the first 3 days and actually lost strokes putting. So if I was going to try and choose between those two, both would be conviction plays. They're both T7 or better players that if you're using have a real legit chance to potentially win, or at very least get you top 3 placement points. I think I'd rather have English, because I think the ownership might even favor the other side of things. And English has the much more sustainable stat profile. So let's get back to the ball striking stats here and go to round 3. So we went through English, Knapp. So Wallace and Scheffler next. So Wallace is T35. Maybe we don't have to do the full event deep dive there just because he's a little bit lower owned, but solid stat profile. Didn't do that much in the short game category. So, at medium to low ownership, there's a chance that he makes his way into my player pool. We also got Scotty Scheffler here at T15. He's always somebody that we want to take a look at. It's world number 1. He's lurking. He's just on the outside of getting some elite tier placement points. And at -6, the guys at like -3, I kind of doubt them getting into the top 5, top 10. But a Scheffler, who's a little bit closer and world number 1, he's somebody that could, I don't think he's going to win this event, but could scare that top 3. The stats today were great. Gained off the tee, gained on approach, lost in the short game categories. That's a good statistical regression category, we would say. You go to round 2, though, he was gaining across the board. Actually, sorry, I was looking at Adam Scott there. Let's type Scotty so we can get Adam Scott's ass out of there. So he gained around the green in round 2. Was a little sketchier, but it was about neutral in the 4 categories. So it's not a terrible stat profile. Then round 1, he was also ball striking heavy. He's yet to have the day yet where he has this ball striking that you saw in round 1. You also saw in round number 3, and he marries it up with even a half decent short game day. And what Scotty Scheffler is going to do when that happens is, instead of just kind of slowly going along, just like plodding his way up that leaderboard like he's done all week, just consistent -1, -2s through the first 3 rounds, that would turn into a -5, a -6. And if he does that starting at T15, that would be an absolutely nutted performance. Now, is he expensive? Yeah, you're going to pay for it at $12,200. But if you're looking to play a Chris Goddard lineup, so maybe you think Rory falters and your narrative for round 4 is, Goddard's going to at least hold on, maybe not win. Maybe even he does win, right? But rather than using a Rory, maybe you expect him just to be about even par or something and not pay off. Maybe it's Scotty Scheffler that you have to have that could still finish behind Rory at the end of the day, maybe around the same kind of score. But if Scotty Scheffler ends up around the same finishing score as a Rory McIlroy, you're going to obviously have to have him towards the top end of the board. And even if Rory beats him by just a stroke or 2, if Scotty Scheffler is making up that 5-shot gap and making up at least 3 strokes on Rory McIlroy, you're probably going to have Scotty Scheffler instead of Rory. That is, of course, unless Rory McIlroy wins this golf tournament. So that's what I would say at least makes Scotty somewhat interesting from the game theory angle, especially with this kind of stat profile that we're seeing there too. So let's keep going down just a little bit further. Christopher Ryan, a player that's a high upside guy. He's at T15. I do have to say, though, that those DP World Tour guys can sometimes show a little bit of nerves when they get into a field like this. So he's also probably a 50-50 for me. His stats have been decent all week, but I do worry about the mindset and the pressure with a player like Chris Ryan. Also, Justin Rose, good ball striking day, gained a little bit over 2 strokes on approach. Short game didn't carry him by any means, so could be potentially somebody that could make a few more putts. Sam Burns, he's at T61, so he'll be essentially unowned, but his stat profile was very off base, I would say, because normally a much better putter. I mean, he lost 0.5 strokes there, but he also lost 2.5 strokes around the green. So his round looked a lot worse with the actual score than how he played in actuality. He hit the ball a whole lot better than whatever the over par score that he posted today was. So at T61, just like who was it the first one we went through, was a Berger that you could use to really get different, or even another stud towards the top that's like in the T35 range, T40 range heading into the final round, rather than taking a Rory up top or getting to a Matt Fitzpatrick who's like 30-40%. If you want to play that 7K chalk, those are the kind of plays that you can make it happen with. And the next thing we'll do is we'll take a look at some of the short game stats. So just like the gaining ball striking is a good thing, gaining a whole bunch in the short game categories can actually be looked at as a little bit of a negative. So, for example, Gary Woodland gaining almost 4 strokes on the greens, that hardly ever happens. So I wouldn't count on that happening in back-to-back days. Wyndham Clark, Andrew Novak got really lucky on the greens too. Both of them were in Wyndham Clark was in featured groups. Got to see him make bomb after bomb on me, even though I bet against him today. So that was tilting. I would not expect him to do that in back-to-back days. He luck-sacked the ever-living hell out of that. But in Andrew Novak too, I bet against him as well. And he also luck-sacked the ever-living crap out of it today. He hooked me by 0.5 on a bet that I faded him on. And it was because he gained like 2.5 strokes putting. So it's not just because I have a slight vendetta against these two that I'm pointing that out. but it's the fact that if you go to their like hole by hole stuff, it's like 20 footer for par, 30 footer for birdie that they're making. And you might be able to do that like once a round on average, but these guys are doing it 3-4 times in their given round, which is just, like I said, very completely unsustainable. Now, could they have a decent round 4 still? Yes, it's golf. They could flip the ball striking and do it that way, but I wouldn't count on it happening like they did it in round 3. So at Campillo, he gained over 5 strokes in the short game categories, right? So not just with the putter, but also the around the green was carried by a guy like Campillo. That's not something I'd count on happening in multiple days. And Francesco Laporta gained over 2.5 strokes short game. Same thing with Antoine Rosner, about 2.5 strokes in those 2 categories. And Ugo Couso, who, and I think that's how you say his name, Couso, I don't know. I probably sound like an idiot either way. But Ugo there, even though my guy Nick hit on that, he called him out as a plane. Well, not. It was mostly the short game that got him there. Now, he still did gain 2.6 strokes in approach. Respect. Irons were dialed in, but this stat profile doesn't reach sustainability from round to round. So that's why I look at those 2 categories and kind of hold it against players a bit. And then on the flip side, I know we've already pointed out a few players with this, but if they lost a whole bunch of strokes short game and they were decent ball striking, those are guys that I'll take for a bounce back. So for example, Thomas Dietrich lost over 3.5 strokes, almost 4 strokes in the short game categories. He gained 1.3 strokes short game. So that's the kind of player that I would look to for a bounce back. I know we mentioned Sime before. I know we already mentioned Daniel Berger as well, so we won't point them out for a second time. But a Henrik Norlander, a Tommy Fleetwood has that same kind of stat profile. All players that at least, especially the ones that are low owned, and if I need a piece of differentiation in that portion of the board, at least going to be taking a look at those players for my player pool. Won't be playing all of them. All these short game regression guys, sometimes like a Daniel Berger, for example, they're just lost on the greens. It's, I don't know, maybe a little bit sketchier to get to some of these guys for the bounce back, but especially the ones that are normally much better putters or even above average putters on the PGA Tour, I'm not going to have the same kind of hesitation. And we can look at the around the green stuff too. That's where the Berger had his around the green problems, but also a Sam Burns, a Victor Hovland didn't have the best around the green days. And if you pair up those struggles around the green and putting, like Daniel Brown has there, gaining over 2.5, or I should say losing over 2.5 strokes in those categories, and you were okay with the ball striking, then at sub 4% ownership, a few of those players will be sneaking into my pool. So that's it. That's what I look at the shots gained metrics to go through my plays. And then the full event stuff as well. I know we brought that up through a few different players, but let's just take a look at the top end of the board and all the shots gained metrics. What I don't love to see, and it's actually the case with a lot of these guys up here, is like Straka 10 stroke short game. Wyndham Clark, 10 stroke short game. Jake Knapp, 10 strokes putting. And heck, even your top 2. I mean, Rory over almost 9, actually a little bit over 9 strokes short game. Chris Cotter up 7.5 strokes in those short game categories. Not all of them are going to come back down to earth. That's why I'm especially the ones that hit the ball well today, like a Jake Knapp, Rory McIlroy, right? He turned it around with the ball striking. Maybe they can continue that into the next day. There is a lot of truth to that statement, right? You can kind of find something on the course, find something during the process of an event and able to keep that going for the remainder of it. That's why there might still be a few of them that I'm playing. But if the ball striking today wasn't there and they've been short game luck sacking it the entire week, those are going to be the prime faded candidates that I have for my player pool. So that's how you use the full event stuff to your advantage. And you can scroll down to, you can still use it for the mid to bottom tier guys. It's just that with the lower owned players, I'm a little bit more prone personally, at least in my process, to take a look at some of the round 2, the round 3 stats. And, there's not an exact right answer to going through a showdown process. Everyone's going to kind of have their own way of doing it, and that's totally fine. Just find what works the best for you, right? Whether that's focusing on round 3 stats, only using the full event stuff, whatever you find the most successful or whatever you have found the most successful, lean into it. And it can be different on different contests, right? Like there could be certain slates where looking at the full event stuff is a little bit better than, looking at the round 3 stuff in particular too. So don't be afraid to kind of mix it up as well on that. Thoughts on, let's go back to some of the player pool deep dives now. Let's see. So how should you go about going with your lineups with starting strokes? Given that there obviously is placement points, should you only take guys in the top 25, and how do you avoid chalk? So we've mentioned like the whole strategy component, kind of the whole live stream. So the answer to that is not a very straightforward one, but you should have at least, I'd say, 3 guys that are starting in the top 25. And sometimes that's even 4 guys that you want in the top 25. Sometimes even 5, I'd say, if you're playing in like a cash lineup and you're just trying to be in the top 50%. It depends on the contest that you're trying to take down, but you mostly want about 3, I'd say, in most of those lineups. And that doesn't mean you want all 6 players starting towards the top, because especially at a golf course like this, where we're still going to get the -5, -6 rounds, you still have to score to make it to the optimal lineup. So don't just rely on that alone, right? Just starting in the top 5, top 10 is not going to be enough. You need players that are going to back that up with, I'd say, especially if you're starting in the top 10, at least like a -3 round. I mean, maybe even -4 round to pay off that kind of a price. So like a Goddard up a Rory, for example, if they have a field average day of like -1 or even par, you're not going to want to have them in your GPP lineup. So hopefully that answers your question. And with avoiding the chalk, you just want to be and we're going to build a lineup. So I think I'll be able to help you a little bit with being intentional about it, but you have to be intentional about getting different. Maybe that's even starting the lineup with your differentiation, throwing in 1-2 players that you know are going to be sub 5%, and then building with your placement points around it. You want to have a plan, and you want to know in the back of your mind when you're hitting submit, where am I getting different? Where am I going to win and lose the GPP tomorrow on top of just who wins this golf tournament? Because that is very important to kind of figure out. Finally able to catch a live stream live. Great to have you in the live chat, man. Let's see. Yeah, don't worry about it, man. I was just kind of sending the guy straight with his comment. And honestly, it might be a learning moment for the guy, right? If he heard slight weather edge and he leaned into it too much, that's something that he should learn from, because that's a mistake. No one ever said that, right? Thoughts on Justin Rose? He's been great ball striking all week. He's been solid ball striking all week. I'll give him that one. And you said he watched his entire round and he hit so many good putts, but not one dropped. You can see the same thing about Scotty today. I mean, he was kind of like laughing at himself at one point. By the time he got to the back 9, he was fist pumping misses, and anytime he lipped out on 10 viciously, he gave like the biggest fist pump I've ever seen in sarcasm. I would say Justin Rose, if he was doing it the same way, I didn't get to see his entire round myself, then that he would be a great bounce back candidate, because he's not going to be mega chalk at that portion, but he's playing good enough golf where I could see him having that -4, that -5 round. So I think that he's an option for sure. And then especially guys like that as well. Kevin says he took down the par 3 tournament on Underdog and won a total of $685. Thanks for helping your friend. Of course, my man. And it's comments like yours, comments like a Line Eye guy from the Discord that make it up. Not the bad apples in chat that decide to spew their BS. So I appreciate that, Kevin. And honestly, let's run it back for Sunday. Only thing better about a takedown and winning some money is doing it in back-to-back days. And hey, if you do it again after that, only thing better than that is the 3-peats. So Keith Mitchell with the deep dive. So yeah, I didn't expect to see a Keith Mitchell question. He had a terrible day. So I'm expecting these shots gained metrics to be pretty ugly here. And that'd be correct, right? So he gained off the tee. Congrats, I guess, because he lost 3 strokes on approach and then lost almost 2 strokes with the around the green play. So it's not like it's unfixable. The approach play is by far the biggest red flag. It's the most important part of golf. That's the part of your swing that you can feel maybe the most solid about from day to day as well. And he completely gave it away in that category. So that's concerning. Probably puts him at like a 3 out of 10 with the ranking with the shots gained profile. But now he's unowned. He was chalk for round 3 showdown. He was towards the top end of the board. I believe only like 3 shots off the lead when he was starting. And now at T35, you're looking at 5% or even lower ownership in some of those GPPs. So it's a completely different situation, I would say, in Keith Mitchell. It almost makes me want to kind of take a look at rounds 1 and 2, because let's remember what got him into contention. And that was really good ball striking. You can see gained across the board. Round 1, he also gained in both ball striking categories. Now, putter was hot round 1. I'd be okay if that happened again round 4, but not something that obviously sustained itself, like we were pointing out. You can see he lost strokes round 2. Round number 3 was also only about a neutral, but the ball striking stats from days 1 and 2 are, I think, a good enough sign where Keith Mitchell, I think I've just talked myself into playing him for tomorrow. So he's going to be cheap twos in that 7K range. Could be a pivot off of a Chris Goddard up chalk. Not going to get you placement points at T35, but that's okay in a few spots. You can have 2 to 3 guys in your lineups where you're not worried about the placement points and be totally fine as well. Question, can you ask what core I would have for a large field tournament? No, I can't give you my core on here. I do have my player pool, though, that I post on my Patreon page. I don't do a core, though, even for my Patreon members. So, right, it's like a no offense sort of response there. I don't give anyone my core for a Showdown slate, and I really don't even play a core for Showdown. It's more so a thing I do for main slate when I'm looking for my conviction plays. But in a case of like round 4 Showdown, the only players that I'm going to be using in, let's say, like 40-50% of lineups are going to be my stands with placement points, which I do actually have a placement point tab on my place in my Patreon page with my player pool for tomorrow, which essentially just says who are the guys that I'm playing towards the top because of where they're starting. I guess those would be my core plays. They're not written down as core plays. They're not technically core plays, but if you're part of the Patreon, those would be my biggest stands for round 4. Is there any hope for Grant Forrest, or is he just too middling everywhere? Let's look at the stats, and I'll let you know, dude. He's got a good course history, so I always think he's got some sort of a chance. And today, very mediocre. So I think you hit the nail on the head with your description. But days 1 and 2 was a lot better. Day 2 was about average. I guess this is your point, right? Last 2 days has been very average to the field. Round 1, though, he was a lot better. He gained 2 strokes ball striking. His course history, as I mentioned, is also another positive. And at T28, he's not going to be popular either. And he has some placement point potential. Now, he's not going to finish top 5, but with a nuclear performance, he does have potential to get into that top 10 or top 15. So probably not playing Forrest. I would say, though, that he's like a 5.5, 6 out of 10. Like, I'm not against it. I just can't play everyone, right? I'm not going to play like 40, 50 guys in my pool. If I was, I would be on guys like a Grant. Them doing threesomes off of 1 in 10 and sending the lower guys out late, does that mean we should play any differently? No, right? We mentioned that before, Kevin. I don't know if you were here for the weather segment, but we already mentioned that. There's no sort of weather edge. They're doing threesomes off of both sides. So there's nothing like that going on. So I would go back to the beginning of the live stream. It's like about 2 minutes in is where we talk about the weather. And yeah, that's been accounted for. We've already kind of mentioned how that changes the strategy. And all it changes is that everyone gets the same conditions. So unlike a lot of Sunday Showdown slates where sometimes the very, very early guys are getting a half a stroke advantage, and maybe you want like 3 or 4 of those guys in lineups, now, because everyone's dealing with an even playing field, you probably want 3, 4 guys towards the top end of the board now, rather than 3 or 4 guys towards the bottom end of the board. So yeah, that's the Spark Notes version of the difference. But yeah, we already accounted for that one before. Some of these cats can't see the trees of the forest. You always have the most wild comments, Ross. And Forrest does have a great name. And I appreciate the review, of course, Chad. Let's go through some strategy and wrap this thing up. And Ross, you send me every time you put one of those comments in chat. But let's keep this thing going. So for round 4, the contests are actually a little bit bigger than the last few days. So round 2, they sucked. Round 3, they were like kind of less sucky. Now they're about average, I'd say, for what we typically see for one of these slates. The 200K contest, this is the big $25 GPP. It's a super top heavy. It is a 4th to first place, so that's 25%. That's a much more top heavy payout structure than we want in actuality. This one's a 3rd to first place, so it's even more dog shit with the payout structure. So not even going to mince my words on it. DraftKings is just kind of murdering these contests, in my opinion. Then you have the Drive the Green here, which is a 6th to first place. So it's still shitty, right? It still absolutely smells like shit, but it's not as crappy as those other contests. So you could, see yourself, if you're going to try and max enter a 150 max for the next day, the best one, and we'll put best in quotes because it's still, like I said, not the kind of payout structure that we want in actuality, would be that Drive the Green. And still decent, I guess, $10,000 payout will get some people there. But I'm personally probably going to focus more on these single entries. So just like this long drive, this is a 30K long drive. It is a 6th to first place. There's a good chance that I'm going to be entering into that. Also, the smaller long drive, this one's a 10K contest. That's a 15% to first place. That's much more in line with what we're hoping to see, because we don't want contests that are super top heavy. Those top heavy contests are a real quick way to go through your bankroll quickly, rather than these contests like this one's 10% to first place, where the rest of the top 5, top 10 is very respectable if you have a solid but not absolutely nutted lineup. So I would say a lot of you guys watching this should probably be focusing on a lot of these single entries as well, especially if you want to play every showdown slate. You want this to be relatively sustainable, because keep in mind that we're playing with a rake on these contests, 10 to even 25, 30%, depending on the contest that you're playing in. The sort of format, right? Cash sometimes has a lower rake compared to some of the other GPP contests that we enter. You've got to beat that, and you've got to beat the rest of the field. And especially when we're dealing with GPP payout structures, when it's like 20, maybe 25, 30% of the field that's getting paid out, it's hard to do so. And when you have a solid lineup, which is still hard to do, but when you have a lineup that is close to the nuts, but maybe you have one stinker out of your 6 plays, you don't want it to be like this, be like $2,000 to first place. And then your second place lineup, let's say that it was like 2,000 to first, and then maybe like 500 or 750 to second. You don't want to be in that scenario, right? Where it's like a $1,200 difference. And you may say like, oh, there's not contests where it goes from 2,000 to 750 to second. Yes, there is. And I'll show you one right now. This big final round finale goes from 50K down to 20K. It's slightly less drastic difference, but it's getting very, very close to that kind of proportion from first to second place. So that's the problem with entering some of those super top heavy ones. And then like even the drive the green is, you can say a lot of the same about. It is a 50% jump, right? You go from 10K down to 5K. That's not as extreme, but it's still sub-ideal. When you take a look at, let's even look at the 30K long drive. Like it's not as bad. It's over 50% to second place. And when you go to the ones that are even closer to that 10% to first place, the reason why it's so important is second place here is almost first place. It's $100 cheaper. That's a much, much smaller gap than you have in those other GPPs. And then when you take a look at the Albatross, it's the most extreme example of it. It's a $50 difference from first to second. It's partially because it's a smaller field, smaller prize pool and whatnot, but proportionally, you're getting a lot more out of that top 5, that top 10. So that's why I'm always so adamant about entering those kind of contests, particularly if you're newer to PGA DFS. If you're newer to PGA DFS and you don't have the bankroll to 150 max is $25. Keep in mind, by the way, that in these 150 maxes, that it's not just like, oh, you can enter up to 150 lineups. There are plenty of people that are going to have 150 lineups in this contest for round 4. So if you're your casual player, your Twillet player entering in the middle of the night, maybe watching this live stream and then entering a few lineups for yourself, don't put in your 2 to 5 lineups in this contest, right? So 100, maybe $150, $125 in lineups against people that have thousands of dollars in lineups that you're playing against. It's not a great scenario to be in. And then you have that payout structure on top of it. That's why the single entries are just the place to play if you're that sort of player. And then the last thing we'll go through would be the lineup construction. And I do want to build a lineup to kind of show you guys that ownership and that lineup construction in actuality and how it looks like when you're clicking names in. So let me get a sip of this, and we're going to start up top. I like to at least personally start up top and then get my differentiation. But as I mentioned before, like potentially even starting with your leverage and then taking your plays towards the top end of the board, whatever works best for you. This is what works best for me, especially when I'm hand building. Just spitballing ideas though, in case you're a little bit different. So we've got a decision to make. In my opinion, it's either or of a McIlroy or Goddard, particularly because we're going to build this lineup like we're entering the big $5 GPP. So we're not going to build this for a single entry. This isn't going to be like my cash lineup or anything. This is going to be the thought process, what I'm thinking about if I'm hand building my large field GPP lineups. And I guess reality is, it's worth mentioning for transparency's sake, that in my large field GPP lineups, I don't build any of them by hand. So we are going to go through the process if you are hand building large field GPP lineups. But what we're essentially going to go through is what I code into my optimizer, the rules that I set, the things that I make sure I have in my big $5 or $25 GPP lineups to ensure that I'm getting positive ROI in all the lineups I'm entering. So we're going to go up top and we're going to make a decision to either take a Rory or take a Chris Goddard. And in the large field GPPs, I already fully gave my take on why that's the case. I think if you take both of them together, it just kind of like pigeonholes you into a really bad spot when it comes to getting different with the game theory. So I'm going to throw in a Chris Goddard up here, who it's just, I don't want to say it's like for no reason, but the reason why I want to take a Chris Goddard up here is because we could say, oh, let's throw in a Rory McIlroy at $11,000, and then we'll get different in the 6-7K range. That's pretty easy, and that's not as interesting, right? What is more interesting, though, is if we start with a Chris Gotterup, who is maybe more egregious chalk. I would totally say that. Like, between those two players, Rory McIlroy is the more likely one to hit. So if they're going to be the same ownership, Rory McIlroy is the better play between those two options. But the reason why we're going to throw Gotterup in here is that we can get different in the 8-9K range if we want to. We mentioned Hovland being an option to do that with before, and there's even nastier options if you want to up top as well. So let's throw in Gotterup. I'm going to throw in a Matt Fitzpatrick. I'm going to say Matty Fitz wins this thing. Gotterup maybe shoots like -2 and doesn't win it. That's just the narrative that I'm kind of building around in this lineup. And then we're going to throw in, I'm tempted to go Aubert. I'm tempted to maybe go Wyndham Clark or Straka as our next man in. I want it to be somebody with a little bit of salary because I don't want to have to take all of our differentiation towards the very top end of the board. So let's maybe even in English, he wouldn't be a terrible option. Let's go Harris English, actually. And Harris English, he had the really good ball striking stats, particularly approach play through the first 3 rounds, is due for some short game regression as well, has not gained a whole bunch of strokes on these sort of greens. And we've got our 3 guys in our lineup here that we're using in the top 10. And your placement point guys, by the way, they don't have to be starting at T7 or better. You can even go a little bit further down the board if you want to. Just make sure that you have at least 3 players in your lineup that have a chance to finish top 5, top 7, I would say. That's really the idea of what you're looking for. If you want to have a 4th guy on top of that, you can. But once you start to get a 4th chalky player into these lineups is when you start to have some issues with getting differentiation. So what we're going to do next is we're going to start to try and get our leverage in here. And I kind of already hinted at using somebody towards the top that's going to get us different to the rest of the field. And we could go with a McIntyre at T66. Shots gained metrics today weren't great, but he's a hometown kid. We know that he's going to fight for all the fans out there. He's not just going to go out there and go through the motions on Sunday. I'd imagine that he's going to be pretty locked in like he has been for the entire week. We can go Fleetwood if he really wanted to force our hand to try and get different as well. But like Sam Burns is calling my name right now. And the reason we're going to go with Burns is he had a decent ball striking day today, but lost in the short game categories. So the stats, we're pointing him out as potential low owned option. And in that 9K range, you're looking at sub 5-7% ownership on a guy like a Sam Burns. So essentially infinite leverage to the rest of the field. And since we started with a pretty chalky first 3 players, I got her up a Fitz in English that were all in the top 7. I really do want to make sure that we can get enough differentiation. So let's go with him. Let's also find another player in this 8K range that we can take at relatively low ownership. I'm thinking even a Ryan Fox would be usable, but a McNeely, an Adam Scott, a Siwoo Kim, or at least in the kind of ownership range that we're looking for. If we wanted to really get different with it, and this is for the large field GPP, and I did say, right, if there was a spot to use a Sam Burns or a Daniel Berger, it would be in those large field GPPs, because if we do so, and this is going to show all the utility and kind of getting to these kind of players, you got a sub 5%er, you got a sub 5%er right there. You can play the Gotterup lineups with some of this chalk towards the top. And, English has that ownership, same thing with a Fitz and a Gotterup. And even if you're last man in here, let's say you used all your salary and you took a Pendrith, or you went down to McNeely Scott, I guess it doesn't really matter who uses your last man in. This isn't a lineup that I'm necessarily going to enter in actuality anyways. It's more so just this thought process that I want to kind of convey to you guys. But let's say you used Pendrith as your last man in, just for, as a hypothetical, I'd say, for round number 4. If you did so, you're probably not going to duplicate yourself with very many other people, because you got 2 guys at sub 5% that are giving you all the leverage that you need for the rest of the field. And, let's say that you went down to a McNeely, you left $100 on the table, and you went to a slightly lower ownership, or you left $200 on the table and went down to an Adam Scott, who's also maybe slightly lower owned than a Taylor Pendrith, then you're going to have no issues whatsoever. Like, you're going to have no duplication risk. You're going to have even more leverage in those sort of builds to try and take down a large field GPP. And, even in the large field GPPs, because Pendrith is T20, he's closer to like 10% or lower ownership in large field GPPs, you can get away with that in a large field contest, right? If you had, let's say that this was a T7 guy at $8,500 and he was closer to like 15 to 20% owned, maybe then you don't get away with it, because that would be then a 4th guy that's mega chalk in this lineup. But because your last man in here is more like a mid-tier guy, right? T20, a little bit sneakier compared to some of the other players around him, That's why you can probably make it work here in those large field lineups. So that's a lineup construction. I know we had the question from Showdown before on exactly how to kind of balance it out and make sure that you're not just taking chalk across the board. If you did want to say, let's say, make it a little bit chalkier, there are ways to make it work. So I at least want to point this out because maybe you have a core of like 4 really chalky guys that you just can't get off of. So for example, maybe rather than Sam Burns, you played an O'Bear instead, who's another T7, right? That's 4 guys at that number. Then that's the scenario now where you need a sub 5%er in Daniel Berger. And then for your last man in, because you have so much chalk here together, even if you get really different, like Siwoo Kim's not chalk per se, but because Siwoo Kim's an $8,200 golfer, your last man in there is still going to be like 10% owned. Because you can't really get the differentiation with the ownership percentage, you have to do it by leaving salary on the table. So if you force your hand, you pigeonhole yourself, as I mentioned it before, into a really chalky start. That's when you have to like go down to like $7,700 and not only leave that salary, but also try and find somebody that is relatively low owned. So like, for example, you might have to go the whole way down here to like a Brian Harmon at T45 to try and make sure that you're not going to duplicate yourself and that you have enough leverage in like 2 spots to get different and actually take down the GBP if you hit on those nutted plays. So that's a few things that you should be thinking about when putting together your builds. But overall, it's just have some placement points, but not too many, and cater it for the contest that you're entering. And large field contest, the bigger the contest, the more leverage that you need. The smaller the contest, right? So single entries, cash, that kind of thing, the less leverage and the less lower owned plays that you need to be mixing in. So it's I think that's an easy kind of rule to live by. Again, larger the contest, the more leverage that you're looking for. And let's have ourselves a Sunday. That's all I've got, guys. Best of luck with everything for tomorrow. I hope to see a lot of your names, a lot of your logos towards the top end of those GPPs. Best of luck with everything that you guys are entering. And of course, for all the content for the rest of the year, make sure you subscribe to the SHIPIT Nation YouTube channel so you guys don't miss any of that when it drops. We're going to have all these events covered, including the Open Championship next week. So if you enjoyed some Scottish golf over here on the European side of things, it's going to be the same exact style of golf for next week, and arguably an even greater golf course than the Renaissance Club. At least for my money, I like it a little bit more than the golf course this week. It's tougher. It's got a lot more carnage out there, which I'm always a huge fan of. Tough conditions, tough golf courses, and the world's best players looking like fools at times. So make sure you subscribe so you guys don't miss any of that. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already as well. And for the round 4 prop and betting live stream, make sure to stop on my YouTube channel at 7 p.m. Eastern time. That'll be at the LukeDFS YouTube channel. So my personal one here on the YouTube side of things for all of your round 4 bets. So on there, we're going to be going through the weather, stat averages for PGA and Live Golf. Live Spain, Live Valderrama is a really fun golf course over there as well. Arguably, I would say an even better golf course than what we're playing at the Renaissance Club. So we'll be mentioning the stat averages for both of those events, weather, how to attack the prize picks and underdog boards for both of those events as well, and the matchups on sportsbooks. So that's like DraftKings and FanDuel. If you guys have access to the sportsbooks on top of just playing DFS like we talk over here, make sure to stop on by for that live stream a little bit later on. But that's all I've got, guys. As I was mentioning before, I'll see if there's any last second questions, any deep dives that we need to go through. If not, we're going to be cutting it off at that point. But I appreciate you guys for all the love that you guys show on the channel, and let's get after it for the next few days. So let's see what's going on. Aaron, does 5 of the T10s or better mean anything for tomorrow? Or let me rephrase that. I butchered the beginning of that. You said last year, we're going to start there because you had the sentence structure a little backwards there. Last year, there were 5 guys at T10 or better that moved up 20 or more spots. So you're essentially saying that there was a lot of volatility last year. I was able to decipher that. Does that mean anything? Yeah, for sure. It's a volatile golf course, especially when it plays about even par. I think that happens at courses that aren't birdie fest. When you get to a golf course that's playing -5, there's hardly any leaderboard movement because everyone's shooting like -4, -5, especially the guys in form at the top end of the board. But at a golf course like this, where the scoring average is just about even, it's the perfect mix of guys that are shooting -4, -5, and then your guys that are blowing up too. Like you saw that from a bunch of leaders, like Bear Style, rip that guy. DP World Tour prospect. He's definitely still a prospect that shot like way over par. But at a golf course like this, you get that volatility, not so much at some of the other ones. So yeah, you can definitely read into it. I'd say it's a byproduct of these sort of courses, and it's a trend that'll happen next week. I mean, the majors courses that are playing like 1 to 2 strokes over par, probably even more so the case than what we have here. Why is Rose only $6,400? It's a good question. I didn't catch that myself, which I think makes him an even better play because he's not going to garner all that ownership. Any non-qualified guys for the Open in need of a great round tomorrow to qualify, especially in the top 20 after round 3? Yeah, I'm assuming they get in if they win, right? Don't quote me on that because I don't know that for absolute certainty. But are any of the guys in need of an Open invite? I'd imagine that there's quite a few that probably are in need of that invite. But let's start, I guess, at the top end of the board. I believe Goddard-Upson has been playing great golf. It would be a travesty if he wasn't in the Open. Marco Penge, he's maybe the guy that would have to qualify for it. I think he might be another DP World Tour stuff, though, especially because he won on that side of things. I believe all the major winners from the DP World Tour end up getting into the Open Championship. So your first real like sketchy guy might be a Matty Schmid. Not 100% sure that he would have qualified at this point, but again, that's just a complete guess based on how he's played so far this year. Maybe a Ryan, he's another DP World Tour guy that might be like 50-50 for that. A Laporta Sullivan. To my knowledge, a lot of these PGA Tour guys have qualified. Tom Kim might not be qualified, and that's crazy to say. I know at some of these other majors this year, he hasn't qualified. So he might even be somebody that's on the fence there, but you'd have to check the qualifying criteria. I'm not 100% versed on that, and it changes every day. So it's hard to be on top of that kind of stuff. Let's see. This guy says, why do they even play round 4? The scores don't change. Yeah, it's just not true. Maybe some recency bias that you're leaning into there. And if you're going to be rude and say like, oh, I asked a question, why didn't you answer it right away? I'm just going to send you to the ban land, man. You're not the sort of person that we want here around this channel. And respectfully, kick rocks, my dude. But that's all we've got, guys. Best of luck with everything that you guys are going with for tomorrow, except for that random weirdo towards the end that was trying to boss me around. Hope the rest of you guys end up taking down your GPP lineups, and I hope that guy finishes in dead last and pays the rake for us. That'd be pretty nice. But that's all I've got, guys. I'll see you guys for the content next week, which looking forward to that Open Championship.